and welcome to the April membership meeting of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. My name's Steve Holeko. I'm the political director of the event. And before we get started with our all-star lineup of speakers this evening, let me just go over something that CCPC has found with using a lot of Zooms the last few years. Instead of putting a lot of links in the chat, what we prefer to do is send an email out tomorrow that has all of the links that we're going to talk about tonight, so that you can pay attention to the speakers. You don't have to go back and forth in the chat, and it'll be a little bit easier for you. The links that the email is going to have will always include how to become a member of the Cuyahoga County Progressive Caucus. We often have people who see the topic who aren't members, who hop on, join the organization. Membership is free, and just sign up and you'll start getting our emails. We also have a donate link. We are all volunteer funded, all volunteer staffed, and if you can give us a small donation, that would be greatly appreciated. But if you give us I don't know if this is considered a small donation, but a $35 donation, we just got these ordered. These really cool new CCPC t-shirts. And Deb has one too. What we will do is we'll put a link in the email tomorrow. And these t-shirts are mail order. So you send us your contact information, your address, your size, and we'll get one to you. Andrew, you got your t-shirt? Should have asked you to wear it. Let's see, looking around the room, nobody else here has one yet, but get them, and maybe next meeting we can have the whole room filled with CCPC t-shirts. We will also send tomorrow a video of this event. A lot of people sign up for the event and then something comes up and they can't make it. We've also found that, like, when we check back like 2 weeks later, like the video will have like 100 views. So there's actually more people that view the video than actually come to the meetings. We'll put a link to Honesty for Ohio Education, one of our speakers tonight, Policy Matters. I mean, those are the folks who are with us tonight. And then at the end of the meeting today, I'm going to talk about what's upcoming in May. But to start off, we want an update from the Abortion Access Constitutional Amendment campaign, which has become one of CCPC's primary focus points, and probably will be, hopefully, through November, when we achieve the great victory of getting it passed. So I want to introduce Cole Wojak, who is from Protect Choice Ohio, and she's going to give an update on the campaign.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Very happy to be here tonight. As Steve said, my name is Cole. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the statewide field manager for Pro-Choice Ohio. You might know our former name, NARAL Pro-Choice Ohio. We went through a disaffiliation from NARAL National back in the end of 2021. And so same team doing the same work, just only repping Ohioans now. So we at Pro-Choice Ohio are part of a campaign coalition called Ohioans for Reproductive Freedom. And we are sort of driving the volunteer side of this bus, actually the paid side too, of this bus towards a ballot campaign for a constitutional amendment this November to enshrine abortion access in the Ohio Constitution. This would also address some other aspects of reproductive health care, including different protections for, IVF treatment, because abortion procedures are occasionally used in various miscarriage management and other reproductive health care settings. But I am here and we are excited because we need some abortion protection. So when we say that this is a across the state big tent coalition, we mean it. At this point, it really is all hands on deck, and everyone has jumped on board. We are, working with groups that are obviously a part of our coalition, which include ACLU, who has a massive field operation, my organization, who runs robust field operations every year, Planned Parenthood, Ohio Women's Alliance. And then also there is another group working to collect signatures as well. And they are called Ohio Physicians for Reproductive Rights. And so they are also collecting volunteer signatures. And then we're also working with like the Ohio Democratic Party and, groups all over the state, much like y'all, who are organized and super tuned in and ready to sort of tell us what you all need from us to get this done in your spaces. And so that's largely why I am here. What we can talk about so far is that the campaign is going very well. We had our statewide kickoff for Ohioans for Reproductive Freedom at the beginning of this month, and we have been able to collect a ton of signatures across the state. And even more, arguably more importantly, we've been able to recruit and equip volunteers to be circulating petitions everywhere that you can think of. I guarantee, whether you know it or not, you've run into one of our folks at this point. So we are cranking. We are currently recruiting for help with the May primary. We want to make sure that we have volunteers at every early vote location. Every primary voting location, so that we can make sure that folks voting that day, who are obviously registered to vote with active registration, can be signing our petitions. That's going to be a huge signature collection yield day, and also what we call a huge validity day, which just means that our rate of success, our rate of valid signatures will be hopefully even higher than it normally is. So full steam ahead, we're cranking. Normally, if this wasn't an abortion campaign, I would launch into some of the more specific numbers around collection. We have to be a little bit more careful about the metrics that we're talking about publicly, because we know that our opposition is paying very close attention to what we're doing, and we have to be careful to not necessarily show more of our hand that we are all collecting towards before we're ready to. At this point, they've already invested millions and millions into the state, and they're going to continue to do so. And so this is the time where we are talking about this to everyone that we can, and also being really strategic in how we're talking about it. So campaign is going super well. We are full steam ahead. We have paid collectors and volunteer collectors in pretty much every county that people have asked us to be in, or every county that we were already planning to be in. And we're going to continue chugging through to July 5th. And then beyond that, we're going to win in November. So very excited to have y'all on board. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know you all have gotten sort of updates up to this point along the way from different folks, but I'm happy to answer any of those questions. And then also things have been popping off at the State House. I know the Honesty and Education folks are going to talk about some of this as well, but we also saw some federal updates and some court things around abortion pills and access. And so if we have time, I can take those at the end too. But broadly, generally, that is the Ohioans for Reproductive Freedom update. We're doing a big push for the primary, and we are happy to train and work with anybody who wants to collect with us. Deb will be sending out all of the relevant links. And other than that, yeah, happy to take any questions.
Cole, can I just a quick question? You mentioned covering the May primaries. The Cuyahoga County Democratic Party is very engaged in getting signatures. In the midterms, they were also very engaged with covering polling locations. So I think it might be good to connect with them, because they have a ready-made list of who lives near what polling location is willing to go there. You see, instead of somebody not from the area starting from scratch.
Absolutely. I am happy to say we are in very close partnership with the team running this campaign from the ODP side. And so we are, the the push for the May 2nd is in coordination with the Ohio Democratic Party, which includes all of the different county parties, because they do have to work through the state party for this one because of some different legal and ethical, like around compensation requirements. So we are coordinating with the Dem Party folks all across the state. We are also coordinating with Red, Wine, and Blue for this push. We're coordinating with Protect Choice Ohio, OPRR, the physicians group that I talked about. We are also coordinating with the America Votes table, which is the C4 nonprofit political table. And so we are also coordinating with them, and then Ohio Voice, which is also the C3 table, and a bunch of the labor organizations too. And so this one, for the primary, I am delighted to say that it is genuinely all hands on deck, and all of the hands that we've been like, all right, you're going to get on board, right? They are all showing up. And it is all one sort of big coordinated effort, which is also how the signature collection process is going to. We are all in constant communication with one another. We are making sure that we are going where we need to go between us and the paid collectors and anywhere else. And so, yeah, all I can say is like we are super plugged in with the other folks that you all will be collecting with and out there seeing collect. And also, if you know of orgs that sort of exist outside of those traditional structures, whether they're political or nonprofit, we would love to bring those folks in as well. And so if you have groups that you're like, hey, this grassroots mutual aid group that I know of that does, you know, meals every Sunday for folks who need them, wants to collect signatures, that like, give me a call and we will get them plugged into. We're working with everybody in the structures and everybody outside of the structures, as long as they are throwing down for abortion access.
So Steve, this might be a good time to tell people, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat or use the raised hand feature. It's down at the bottom of your screen where reactions, not just the wave. It's because what it does is it puts you up at the top. And we do have one question really quickly from Gail Larson. Is there any concern about the move to change the requirements for doing the ballot initiative? Oh, you muted, Cole.
I'm so sorry. I really do just do that out of reflex. Better that than like to not mute myself when I need to, right? Yeah, I will say yes, many concerns. And with those many concerns come many varieties of contingency plans. This is one where we really get to sort of milk the benefit of working in coalition with other partners who also have a vested interest in that threshold not changing. And so it might get to a point where, you know, we are all paying attention to the August special stuff. We're all paying attention to the November repro stuff, but like the abortion groups are handling repro while everybody else holds it down for democracy. We might get to that point. Much concern, many plans. We'll definitely keep you posted. It's a very, very, very busy week in committees this week in particular. So the update right now will be different from the update on Friday. Good question.
Do we have any other questions, Deb?
No, just somebody said incredible organizing. Thank you. Elaine said, thank you, Cole. That's it.
Just to, you know, one quick note before we close on this topic. I was working for the Ohio Federation of Teachers in 2011 when the SB 5 repeal campaign occurred. And that campaign had to get 375,000 valid signatures in 3 months because it was a referendum, not an initiative. And it ended up taking a giant semi truck with 1 million signatures to be delivered in Columbus. What we're seeing in Cuyahoga County right now is just like that effort. It has really exploded. We sent out a Friday email, upcoming abortion access constitutional amendment petition events. And we send that out on Friday. It's just like exploded. with events like all over the county where you can sign the petition, where you can pick up a petition to circulate. So I think we're in good shape, but like Gail and Cole mentioned, fingers crossed on the 60% threshold. One other thing, CCPC has something that we call petition delivery service. And if you click on a link in our emails, you put your address and name down. If you can't make it to a location to pick up a petition, we'll deliver it to you. So, it's kind of a little extra thing. And I think Randy's hand is up.
Randy, you have to unmute.
What I was wondering about is whether the campaign is working with the Democratic caucus in the House and Senate, coordinating anything, because they're the ones who know what's really going on, in the halls of the State House. And I just was curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the side of the caucus that is able to work with the campaign, we are working with them. They are technically they fall under the Ohio Democratic Party umbrella because they are technically employed by the party on the caucus campaign side. And then in terms of working with that team on the official caucus side, not with the campaign, but with all of the rest of the work we do. So my organization also is one of the key organizations, one of 2 or 3 organizations that lobbies and engages in the legislature around these rights and issues as well. And so we happily get to work with the caucus on both sides. And yeah, they are some of my very favorite staffers. I have had the privilege of getting to work with a couple of them in a different couple of phases of their lives. And it's been really fun to get to work with them through sort of what this post-Dobbs era of this work looks like. Because, ooh, we thought it was crazy before. We knew it was going to be crazy now. And boy, is reality crazy.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, always at this time of the year, in an odd year, is the Ohio budget. And our next speaker is going to talk about what's going on in Columbus concerning that. The budget's very, very important. So I'd like to welcome an old friend of ours, Zach Schiller from Policy Matters.
Thanks, Steve. I'm probably going to snow you under with a lot of figures, so bear with me. We're right in the middle of budget season. And in fact, for those paying attention, the House budget just came out today or late yesterday. So we're still actually going over that and are not quite as ready to talk about it as if it had come out a few days ago. But I want to give you as kind of an overview, talk especially about taxes, and then about a bunch of the features in the budget, because what happened was Governor DeWine introduced his budget a couple of months ago. The House, which means basically the House Republicans by and large, come in with their budget, which they just did. That's going to be reviewed and approved in the next week, maybe less. And then it'll go to the Senate, and the Senate will go over it for a month, month and a half, and they'll come up with their version middle of June. And then they'll have a conference committee and work out the differences by the end of June, where DeWine will then sign it and veto various items. So that's the process. And so we're coming to the end of the House portion of it. So broadly, Ohio is in the best financial shape that it has been in many decades. If you ever thought that there was something that the state ought to be doing, it ought to be doing it now. The state is sitting on $5.5 billion. To give you an idea, the general revenue fund budget is about a $30 billion a year budget. So that's a significant amount of money. This came about because we got direct aid from the feds because of COVID. and because the economy has been strong, again, because Congress took strong action to make sure that we didn't undergo the kind of depression that people were thinking when the pandemic first struck. So we are doing much better than we have in a long time. And so we have this money both to spend in reserve, and we've been doing better than expected in our revenue for quite a while. So Governor DeWine put out his package. He wanted to spend almost $2.5 billion, put it aside for economic development, some of which would be used to develop new sites for companies, but some of it would just be given away to companies like Intel or whoever showed up that they wanted to give money to. He wanted to have $1 billion fund for Medicaid because, as some of you may know, the pandemic continuation of Medicaid benefits has just come to an end. Many people are going to be knocked off Medicaid, hundreds of thousands, which is in itself a major concern. How much is this going to cost the state? They don't know. So the House took a look at this and they said, well, no, we're not doing all of that. So they've slashed that amount. They're putting $1 billion into rural highways, a slew of grant programs. So already they have switched a bunch of stuff that DeWine wanted. One of the signal things that the House is doing is it's cutting taxes. This is something, of course, we've seen for almost 20 years now. It hasn't worked. It's basically rebalanced the tax system so that lower income people especially, but even middle income people are paying more on average than they used to. I think I will have a slide later that'll show that over that time, the top 1% have gotten what amounts to an average $50,000 a year tax cut because of all of the accumulated tax cuts over the past 20 years. So what did the House do? Well, it just put out yesterday a income tax cut, and it isn't actually as severe as I thought it would be. So in that sense, I guess it's a good thing. It's still, however, an income tax cut. It's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars that should be spent instead on education, on mental health, on parks, libraries, schools, you name it. And instead we'll be going mostly into the pockets of more affluent Ohioans. This tax cut isn't quite as slanted totally in favor of the richest Ohioans, but it still is such that basically anybody making less than about $28,000, $30,000 a year will get bupkis, zero, because they don't pay income tax right now. People making under around $50,000 will get $3, maybe $10, literally $10. Then if you make between $50,000 and $92,000, you'll get somewhere between $3 and $222, and anybody over $92,000 will get $222. So you can see that it's still an unbalanced thing where even though the people at the top aren't getting thousands, it still means that people at the bottom and moderate income people are getting little or nothing. More affluent people are getting something, not a huge amount, but something. And meanwhile, the state is losing $400 million a year. So this is a bad idea, as you can imagine, and it's one that we've been fighting. It is better than the flat tax that I'll talk about in a moment. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about what's in the budget. The budget is important because everybody knows that it's going to pass and because there's a lot of money in it. And so it means that they try and attach practically every kind of policy thing to the budget that you can imagine. And thankfully, we've not seen some of the most extreme social issue type garbage so far anyway put in here. You know, the stuff that we've been hearing about House Bill 83 with higher ed, the anti-trans stuff, you know, all of these kinds of things that have been polluting the state and which are in various other bills. Most of them, thankfully, have not made it into the budget yet. So that's a good thing. There are, given the fact that we have a lot of money and that the needs of Ohio are so great, there are some decent things in here. The governor put forward some decent things. I want to cover a few of them. One is they want to expand Medicaid to cover pregnant women and children up to 300% of the poverty level. That was maintained in the House budget. They want to add 15,000 people, kids, 3 and 4-year-olds, to those who will get pre-K. They're going to increase childcare eligibility for subsidies from 142 to 160% of the poverty level. That, again, is too low. It's not as high as it should be, but it's an improvement. All of that is in the House budget, just as DeWine proposed it. There's also, many of you probably know of the Fair School Funding Plan, which was an attempt to finally make the school funding constitutional. Instead of funding that altogether, they've been funding it in pieces. DeWine put forward, let's put in the second of 3 pieces of that. But he wasn't funding it to the degree he should. He wasn't using the most recent costs. The Fair School Funding Plan is based on how much does it cost to actually educate a kid. And to do that, you have to have the most current costs. How much are we paying teachers now, not 5 years ago? So DeWine's plan didn't do that. The House's does. So there's an improvement there. DeWine also put forward major increases in the Ohio College Opportunity Grant, which is the main scholarship for low-income Ohioans to go to college. That was scrapped mostly in the House plan. So to go through some of the other elements, and I'm sorry if I'm going to bore you with some of this, but maybe to one or another people, it'll be important. You know, the K-12 and higher ed spending is still not where it needs to be. It isn't where it is even compared to what inflation has taken away over the last number of years. So, and what the House wants to do, for some reason, they seem to have it in for higher ed. One of the worst things in the budget that was bad as DeWine put it in, and is even worse in the House budget, is they want to expand school vouchers. We know about school vouchers here in Cleveland since we pioneered that here in Ohio, unfortunately. The House wants to take it up to 400% of the poverty level. You may remember originally school vouchers were supposed to only be for students who were in failing schools or for, you know, schools who were, the students were poor. Now they're going to take it up to 400%. The House wants to take it to 450%. I forget what that is, but I think it's like, what, $130-some thousand or something. I mean, it's wildly extreme. However, one of the good things the House did was DeWine wanted to put $400 million over 2 years into putting cops into the schools, the school resource officers. And we don't even know how many of them there are. We don't even know how they're trained or what they do. We don't know what their experience has been. None of that is transparent, and yet he wanted to put all this money into it. A coalition formed to try and say, well, okay, if you're going to do that, at least give schools the choice of, say, putting the money into mental health counselors or, you know, other things that schools may think is more useful to them than having cops around. Thankfully, the House has zeroed that out. Now, God knows why, but that is not in the House version of the budget. One of the big debates in Columbus has been, how much are we paying the home care workers, the people who go into people's homes who are disabled, who are older, who need assistance? Ohio has had shockingly low pay for those folks. So many of them are only making like $12 an hour. They're not even making as much in many instances as they could make if they were working in a fast food eatery. And so DeWine did propose an increase, and the House has said, at least for those who work at for people with developmental disabilities, they're going to take that up to $17 or $18 an hour. Still not enough, but an improvement. They also would cover doulas for Medicaid in the House version. They did not, however, put any more money into food banks or into increasing the amount of SNAP benefits that's allowed. Many of you may know, because there's been a lot of, or many of you may even be among those folks who were affected by the fact that the pandemic SNAP benefits were ended, the extra benefits. And so we have 670,000 households in Ohio that are losing an average of $188 a month in federal food assistance that's going away, that has gone away just in the last few weeks. And proposals to either supplement the amount the food banks get or to provide them a little more assistance have gone nowhere. So that's kind of a shocking element of this. You'd think that there would be a little more interest in that, but maybe our friends are looking at what's happening in Washington and the moves by the Congress to cut back on SNAP benefits. DeWine, interestingly, has not himself pioneered or put forward big overall tax cuts. He put forward a whole variety of smaller tax changes, deductions for people with kids, homeowner savings accounts, increases in the motion picture tax credit. Many of these things were not really broadly a benefit to the people who most need them. And some of them have been accepted, some of them have been rejected. The thing that's gotten a lot of attention in the past month and a half is House Bill 1. And some of you have probably seen the news coverage on that. I think that I'm going to ask Deb to start with sharing the screen for my PowerPoint. I'll go over some of this quickly without trying to go into it in elaborate detail. But House Bill 1 has what's called a flat income tax. And a flat income tax is something that is essentially a way to reward the wealthiest people with giant tax cuts and cut the amount of money that the income tax raises. And so in two different ways, a flat income tax is a terrible idea. Ohio, like most states, has a graduated income tax where you pay more as you earn more. And we've been chipping away at that for the last 15, 20 years. Our tax is now way lower than it once was. But we still do have a graduated tax where if you make, $150,000, $200,000 a year, you're going to pay more on that higher income than people making $25,000 or $30,000 a year. And that's as it should be. So this bill, House Bill 1, would create a flat tax, and it would reduce the rates to a single rate of 2.75%. And what it did, however, was it added in all kinds of property tax changes along with that. And the result of those property tax changes was, I think because the authors of the bill didn't really even understand how Ohio's property tax system worked, the net result of the bill, as described by the Legislative Service Commission, the staff to the legislature that looks over all the bills, was that this would mean a $900 million property tax increase for residential property holders, a $500 million cut in aid to schools and other local governments, primarily counties, and a $700-some million shortfall in paying for the income tax cut, while meanwhile, business property owners would actually see a property tax cut. Well, we call this a trifecta of bad policy. And it actually created such a storm that the schools and the libraries, you can go to the next slide, please. The schools and libraries and the local governments went crazy over this. They went down and testified. This slide shows you how some of the various school districts would fare. Cleveland also would similar to see a decrease of millions of dollars in how much aid it was getting, even as people had to pay more property tax. It was sort of the worst of all possible worlds. So what's happened is all of the property tax elements of that have been shelved. And so it shows you the power of opposition, that you can in fact keep some of these really horrible ideas from going anywhere, even with our supermajority Republican legislature. Please go to the next slide. So we all expected that this flat tax would then either go into the House budget bill or something like it would. And as I've mentioned, this results in a huge reduction in revenue. It cuts aid to local governments and public libraries. And you can go to the next slide. So this shows you how people would do with the flat tax. And it shows you how, if you make 50 grand, you'll get basically nothing. Less than that, you'll get nothing at all. And it goes up so that by the time you make $500,000, you'll be getting a $5,000 tax cut. And it depends a little bit on how your family size is, but not a whole lot. Next slide, please. And this puts it in more detail. I think if you look at I don't know if you can see, but the column that's over on the furthest right that says the richest 1% would on average get an $11,000 tax cut out of the flat tax. Whereas you can see people at the bottom get nothing. So this is, sort of the worst sort of tax policy parading as economic benefit. And interestingly, the states well, go ahead, next slide, please. This shows you how much, as I said earlier, the top 1% got out of all of our tax cuts in the past 15, 20 years, $50,000 a year. Next slide. And this shows you it's kind of hard to read, I know, but the bottom 20%, people making less than about 25 grand, are paying 12% of their income in state and local taxes, and almost nothing in income tax. The blue bar shows you the income tax as a share of the total. So you can see it's the one thing that makes our tax system a little more progressive. So flattening it or reducing it or eliminating it will make our tax system even more regressive than it is now. So you can see people in the top 1% are paying only a little over half as much of their income in state and local taxes as people at the bottom. Next slide, please. This shows you that states with flat taxes and how their economic performance is not any better. All of the nearby states with flat taxes actually have done worse than Ohio in recent memory. Those that have done better are actually located elsewhere and have higher tax rates than we do even now. Next slide, please. This gives you an idea of where our revenue comes from. And it tells you that the income tax, even after all these changes over the past 15 or 20 years that have cut the income tax almost in half, is still a huge source of our revenue. It's second to the sales tax, unfortunately, but it's still gigantic. Next slide, please. This shows you, and it should say millions instead of billions at the top, but this shows you the slide on the left, or rather the bar on the left, shows you how much we get in personal income tax, $10 billion a year. All of the others show you how much we spend on various things. So you can see we get more in personal income tax than we spend on primary and secondary education. So if we start chopping that or repealing it, as many of our friends down in Columbus would like to do, that's what it's going to mean. It's going to mean we can't support any of these services to the degree that we do even now, which is of course insufficient. So next slide, please. And this shows you a poll that we did last September that most Ohioans actually support taxing rich people more. They support the idea of adding more to how much the richest Ohioans pay, people making over $250,000 or $500,000 a year, adding in new brackets at higher levels, saying, okay, you make more than that, you pay more income on that share of your income. And that's the way a progressive tax works. It's sort of like pancakes, where you pay more only on the income over a certain amount. So you can see even in rural Ohio or suburban Ohio, there is majority support for this kind of thing, and fairly strong support. So we need to tap that, and we haven't. Next slide, please. So these are some of the links. You'll get these later, I think, for some of the work we've done on this. I think the main point that I need to make about the budget, to bring it back to the budget, is, okay, let's see the House passes the tax cut that's in there. You know, most of the rest, there's going to be an amendment with some other changes in the next few days. It will then go to the Senate. The Senate is run by even more conservative people, where they have an even bigger majority. And so we have to be concerned that they'll put the flat tax in the Senate bill, or they'll do all kinds of other bad stuff and worsen what's in the House bill. So there are all kinds of opportunities here for us to go to the Senate, to testify, to contact our senators. Matt Dolan is actually the head of the Senate Finance Committee. He's right here in Cuyahoga County. I know that CCPC may not be the friendliest of organizations to Matt Dolan, but as individuals, you could certainly contact him and say, here's what we need to do with the state budget. And, you know, he's by no means the worst of the bunch of them down there, believe me, but he's foursquare in favor of a lot of these fat tax changes. So I don't know if Evan O'Reilly is on the call. If so, he could talk. If not, I can say another minute or two in place of him.
Evan, are you there?
You have to unmute, Evan.
Yes, I'm here. It wouldn't let me unmute myself for some reason. Thank you, Zach. I'm Evan O'Reilly. I'm one of the organizers with Noble, Northern Ohioans for Budget Legislation Equality. And we've been working with Policy Matters and some other groups over the past couple months to do some advocacy around the budget. Our primary issue areas have to do with things that are, affect people on fixed incomes for the most part. But specifically, we want to expand Medicaid access and protect what's already there. We want to expand the kinship care programs that are available, which is, people who can't be taken care of by their parents being placed with family instead of foster parents, and those providers receiving the same kind of financial assistance. We also work around supporting the expansion of public transit funding. And then we've been doing some advocacy around ARPA dollars as well. But we went down to Columbus 3 times this past month, twice to speak at committee hearings and once to have a lobby day with members of the House. And we will be doing that again with members of the Senate over the upcoming couple of months. So We're actually meeting with a House representative on Zoom tomorrow, but we are trying to get meetings with senators right now, and we'll also be going down for the Ohio Association of Food Banks Lobby Day on May 3rd, as well as the Ohio Organizing Collaborative Lobby Day on May 17th. And so if anyone here would be interested in joining us in one of those meetings or one of the times that we go down to Columbus, I'll put my email in the chat and make sure that it gets shared out afterwards as well. We also put together a pretty extensive platform with regard to the budget and our different issue areas. I'll make sure that that gets included in what gets sent out as well. But basically, we are working our best to put the people who are, feeling kind of the sharpest end of these budget cuts in the room with legislators to have a conversation and speak to their, actual lived experience with what it feels like when these things are disinvested from. So I'll put my email in the chat and send some things for Steve to send out afterwards with the rest of the links and everything. Yeah, I think that about covers it on Noble's end. Was there anything else, Zach, you wanted me to get into?
No, I think that's great. I think, Noble is a really unusual organization in bringing, they don't hear from low-income people in Columbus enough, and they need to. So, but anyway, I think, anybody who can join them or on any of these lobby days or with any of their meetings, please, go ahead and do so.
Do we have questions on the budget section of tonight's meeting?
Nothing in the chat so far.
Do we see any?
Randy, go ahead, Randy. You gotta unmute, Randy.
I just wondered if there's anything in the budget regarding housing. Because right
Yes.
now, the issues of homelessness and housing are catching national attention. And I just wondered if there was anything in the
Yeah,
budget.
I can tell you something. I would refer you to Ohio, especially, which is following this a lot more closely than I am. My understanding, DeWine put forward a state low-income housing tax credit, which the House has agreed to with some changes. And so that's, no immediate solution to our housing problems, obviously.
Right.
But it is at least a small step in the right direction. My understanding also is that, again, in a small way, the Ohio Housing Trust Fund is the main thing the state has done in the past as far as developing more affordable housing, and it has been quite limited. And I think that there is at least the authorization for a little bit more to be spent on the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. They are based on recorder fees when people sell their house, and there's a recorder fee. And I think that recorder fees would allow for more spending. And so there's a bit more that was in DeWine's budget. I haven't seen yet in the House version where that stands. I think those are the only two things I know about offhand. As for, so I mean, I don't think there's any massive attempt to deal with the housing affordability problem, but there are at least a couple of modest positives.
Okay.
But I would strongly advise you to contact the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio, because these folks are much more on top of it and could tell you, I don't know, for instance, with rental assistance, I kind of doubt there's anything more there. And a lot of the ARPA money, as you know, is disappearing. So to the degree that that was an aid for a while is no longer there.
Anything else in the chat, Deb?
Nope.
Okay, to segue into the next section, about 20, 30 years ago, when I was still teaching, we were fighting what we messaged as the Republicans' war on public education. And I think many of you remember that messaging. At that time, what the war on public education was, well, we're going to strip public education of funding. We're going to make standardized tests harder and more unfair for minority communities. And then when the test scores are really low, we're going to say, look, public schools suck. So we're going to continue to cut funding. We're going to continue to fund vouchers. But now it has escalated almost exponentially. They are attempting nothing less than a fascist takeover of the curriculum and the structure that public education is governed by in the state of Ohio. To put it honestly, there's a lot of dishonesty going on in public education. So I want to introduce somebody from an organization called Honesty for Ohio Public Education, Communications Manager Elaine Schliefer.
Thank you, Steve. Hey, everybody. I am going to attempt to share my screen. All right. Everybody see my screen? Okay. Nice to be with everyone today. My name is Elaine Schleifer. My pronouns are she, her. I live on the west side of Cleveland, and I work for Honesty for Ohio Education as their communications manager. Who is Honesty for Ohio Education? We are a statewide, nonpartisan nonprofit. We are part of the Ohio Voice family of nonprofits. Our job in one breath is to prioritize education and advocacy in 3 lanes: the State House, the State Board of Education, and in our local schools, because that culture war that Steve just referred to is going on strong in all 3 of those lanes. And so our coalition is more than 50 member organizations and thousands of individual Ohioans. And I just wanted to share kind of our framework that we approach this work from. So we advocate for honest education. What does that mean? That means that education provides children with diverse perspectives, that it provides them with honest facts about history and culture and social studies and the Ohio that we all live in together. And it means that we don't minimize parts of our shared past that are a little bit more complicated, that it's actually really important for everyone to understand all of those complicated bits of our history. So the state of education in Ohio today, and I'm just going to brush over this briefly. I wanted to kind of ground us in what's happening across the country, because this is certainly not limited to Ohio. So these are 3 maps that I rely on a lot in my work, and they just kind of show that whether it's anti-CRT, anti-LGBTQ identity, anti-higher ed, Ohio is in the middle of all of it. We have tons and tons of bills coming and passing. And so you'll see us with a lot of triangles on the map to the left. We're in red in the map in the middle, and green on the map on the right means that we have active ongoing bills that are pushing on our higher education system. And I also wanted to share this bill. I myself am a member of our queer community, so I take this one real personal. Ohio is kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of activity across the country that would ban or harm the LGBTQ plus community. But what that means is that we have several initiatives ongoing in Ohio that would have a negative impact on my community. And I just wanted to share this slide because this is this is not even quite our full roster of bills that we're weighing in on, but this is like the full scope of what's happening at the State House. So the State House has introduced bills on censorship, whether that's banning books or banning certain words and phrases and concepts in curriculum where the educators are allowed to speak on in the classroom. We're seeing this take place in anti-LGBTQ legislation, and we're seeing this take place in some of the governance and funding structures as well. All of this is death by 1,000 cuts, just in the same way that Cole could tell us that abortion has been faced in Ohio for about the past 15, 20 years, death by 1,000 cuts. You just keep whittling away at it. That's what the Republicans are doing to education. And so this is some of that whittling away. How do we make educators seem less trustworthy? How do we make students seem like they're not doing the right thing? How do we make public schools, look bad so people feel like they want vouchers and they want private or parochial education? That's the big framework in which all of this is living. So I'm going to walk through just a handful of particular bills and give you all kind of a snapshot of what we're fighting. So Senate Bill 1 and House Bill 12, we're going to talk about in one breath because they are essentially the same piece of legislation. This is the state takeover of public education, by which I mean that public education in Ohio right now is administered by a state board of education, which has a majority of elected members. So if we don't like what's going on in education in Ohio, we vote in new members and it changes how education is administered in Ohio. What these bills do is take education administration from the Ohio Department of Education and from the State Board of Education and create a new agency that they're calling the Department of Education and Workforce. And that agency lives inside of the governor's cabinet. So the highest education official in the state of Ohio would be an appointed member of the governor's cabinet, which means that not only do folks lose their voice, their direct access to that elected membership who's beholden to the people for their election, we lose that. We lose public comment period. You can go to the state board every month and be heard on whatever subject you want to be heard on. What we know from the task forces and the committees that exist inside of the governor's cabinet is that they are not treated that way. So we're losing democracy here. We're also losing just good governance here. These bills, we know because it's Senate Bill 1, it's literally the first bill that the Senate wanted to introduce. This is where a lot of energy has gone. And we watched Andrew Brenner, the senator who's the chair of the Senate Education Committee. We watched him fight tooth and nail over Senate Bill 178 in lame duck last year. It very nearly passed, and that's exactly what this legislation is. So during lame duck, one of our big arguments was, you are overhauling an entire subset of the state in weeks without any public input. And so they were like, all right, well, we'll just do it during general session. And they have no intention of actually hearing us. They are still going to shove this through, but they're going to go ahead and do it during the 135th Assembly and call that fair. So one thing I want to name is that House Bill 12 does seem like it's the less likely vehicle for this. We suspect that Senate Bill 1, they're going to try to jam that through. If they don't get Senate Bill 1 through, we also expect to see this in the budget. So I want to return to a little bit of that framework around how we're treating students in Ohio. So a lot of our bills do face, reduction in what we allow students to learn, as well as reduction in student rights in their school environments. And so all three of these bills kind of live in that sphere. So the first is House Bill 6, which we're calling it the trans student athlete ban. What it actually does is take all the school athletics from elementary school up through higher ed and demand that everyone administering school sports have only 2 teams, a male team and a female team. And so if you are participating in school sports, you must do so on the basis of the gender marker on your birth certificate. So if you remember House Bill 454 from last year, that was this same bill, but the certification for who would be allowed to participate was based on a literal genital inspection. That's where we're at in the state of Ohio. And so the bill is back this year. They've taken out that incredibly egregious part of it and replaced it with just gender markers on birth certificate, but it still does the same damage. It also sets us up for a lawsuit with the NCAA, who does not administer athletics under this. And so there's a lot of interesting conversation about, like, what's Ohio State going to do about this? And so we haven't seen all of the coins shake out on this one yet, but we have opponent testimony on House Bill 6 tomorrow. And so if you get a chance to tune into the Ohio channel, it's sure to be a live one. And then we have House Bill 8. House Bill 8 is colloquially known by the Republicans as the Parents' Bill of Rights, which sounds good enough, right? We do think that parents should have input into the education that their children receives, but what it's cloaking is the Republican idea of what parents should be allowed to decide. So it institutes a very broad and hard to pin down definition of sexually explicit material. And so when it says that it bans sexually explicit material in classrooms, what it means is that it's banning LGBTQ plus identities. So that means that people like me can't come and share our experiences. It means that you can't read a book about people like me. So it's really damaging to a lot of our kids. And we know also that the Gen Z and those younger than them are tending to come out earlier and earlier in life. So when we make school a specifically unsafe environment for our young folks, it's going to have a really detrimental impact on their mental health. And to that end, we swipe over onto House Bill 68. This is the ban for gender affirming healthcare for minors, introduced by Representative Gary Click, who really fucking hates trans people. Gender affirming care has been proven everywhere across the country in every study to reduce suicidality. Like, so not is it just better mental health and better physical health, we are literally keeping our kids alive when we provide gender affirming care. And I'm not talking about like surgical care. Gary Click loves to jump right on over to surgeons are going to cut up your kids and they're going to get to them in your schools. And there's all kinds of fear mongering. Gender affirming care is like a therapist saying, like, I see you and I'm willing to use the name that you prefer. And your teacher saying, oh, I see that you're using this new name. Can we use that in the classroom too? That's gender affirming care. It's not this big bad bogeyman that they're talking about. And so there's a potential for real harm on this one. 68 was introduced really early in the year. It just now got put up on the docket for sponsor testimony taking place tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. And now I'm going to get to what I think is the pinnacle of fascism in the state of Ohio right now, which is Senate Bill 83. Senate Bill 83, we're calling it the Higher Education Destruction Act because it will literally destroy higher education in the state of Ohio. It was introduced last month by Senator Jerry Serino, who's a devotee of the Heritage Foundation, and it is literally copied and pasted from model legislation from the Heritage Foundation. So we heard that proponent testimony a couple weeks ago. Opponent testimony on this is tomorrow. Now, when I say opponent testimony is being heard tomorrow, I mean that they gave us a 4 o'clock hearing and we are bringing 6 hours of testifiers with us. So prepare for a long day tomorrow. Here is the content of Senate Bill 83. On one hand, there are a lot of bans and prohibitions that it makes, and on the other hand, there are a lot of things that it will enforce. So in our bans and prohibitions group, we've got that it bans requiring DE&I training and programming. We've already seen Oberlin come out and say that's actually really integral to how we facilitate the culture of Oberlin. It also bans groups, clubs, and organizations that segregate student, faculty, or staff on the basis of race, sex, sexuality, or gender identity. And so here's the part where I need y'all to pause and think to yourself, what's going to happen to sororities and fraternities? What's going to happen to Hillel? What's going to happen to athletics? What's going to happen to the Black student unions? Ohio State happens to have a really excellent Indian classical dance team. They're nationally award-winning. That's a group that's segregated on both race and sex. What are they going to do, right? So there's huge ramifications for what this language is, and the language is incredibly broad. So this bill would further restrict discussions about those same topics, race, sex, sexuality. So it takes these lived identities of folks like you and me, and it turns us into divisive concepts. We are only political chips at this point. We are not real Ohioans per this bill. So this bill would also ban academic relationships with China. That includes study abroad, that includes research and any kind of partnerships. And for the record, Ohio State University renewed their relationship with Wuhan University this year. And that relationship includes research on COVID. So there's a huge wealth of repercussions to ending relationships like that. So let's talk now about what 83 demands that we actually do. So my personal favorite part of this entire bill is the intellectual diversity rubric, which is a state-written, state-mandated diversity rubric that will be applied to every course and every professor in every university, public or private, in the state of Ohio. The scores that professors and courses earn must then be published on that university or college's website. And the questions of that rubric are written by the state. So there's not any room in here for campuses that have different cultures, for students having different reactions to different kinds of curriculum, for students in different majors and different programs to have different responses to coursework that's outside of their majors, right? And our colleges and universities right now, they account for all of this. They have pretty complicated systems right now of how they do course review and how they do tenure review. And there's reasons for that. And this bill just wipes out all of that complexity and replaces it with this one size fits all intellectual diversity rubric. So we are also going to start requiring everyone graduating from an Ohio public university or college to take this single prescribed US history and government course, and that they have prescribed it down to week by week, the curriculum, what you will read, what you will write, and what you will talk about. That is how nitty gritty this particular bill has gone on this level of social studies in higher education. This bill also mandates particular language for every college and university mission statement, which means that you now must copy and paste your institutional mission statement from the state of Ohio. And the consequences for not falling in line with all of these awful fascist requirements is the complete loss of all of your public funding. And there's a conversation that's happening behind the scenes, especially with campuses like Ohio State, who have plenty of money, about what it would look like to simply divest from the state. That's the level that we're at right now. And so I want to name that also in contrast with the trans student athlete ban, which might bring a lawsuit from the NCAA. And then now we're over here in deep water with Ohio State. Like there's no safe ground. There's no safe ground to walk on in this entire ecosystem. So what can you do? You can come to my organization, you can sign up for a newsletter, and we will tell you how to fight each and every single one of these things. Literally, my job is to create pathways for regular Ohioans to be able to call, email, write, visit, testify, anything you need to do in the legislature, the State Board of Education, or your local school board. That's my job to facilitate that for you. So come on over to our website and join our mailing list. And then every week we do a once a week newsletter, and it's going to tell you what bills are moving, what committees they're in, what's up at the State Board of Education. And then if your local board is having trouble, we can also help you with model resolutions for your local board. We can help you connect with other folks taking action in your neighborhood. So we're really working really hard with our huge coalition to be that one-stop shop. If you have a problem in your school, in higher education, anywhere in the state of Ohio, you should be able to come to us and we should be able to help you out. And with that, I will stop share because that is all of the fascism that I can possibly talk about today. And I'm happy to take any questions.
We have one question so far. Is there a way to call out the bad actors paid for by Koch, the Federalist Society, et cetera, who are getting their claws in Ohio's anti-election education bills?
Great question. What I ask myself every day. I will tell you that Senate Bill 83, Serino tells a nice little story about, he's like literally, oh, it's just been on my mind. And I was in the shower one day and I thought, hey, I thought I'd sponsor this higher education bill. If you Google the actual text of that bill, it is copied and pasted verbatim from Heritage. And so there's definitely a strong, like, national conservative think tank bent to what's happening here. And so it is really important to understand where the language is coming from and why. I'm not quite sure about what the most effective way is for us to push back on that. I will say that when Honesty testifies, very frequently we will say, this bill is not from Ohio. It does not solve problems for Ohioans. It was not initiated by Ohioans. It's not for us. It's not by us. It's not from us. So we try to lay that out. And the other piece of this conversation is Florida. So there's Koch, there's Federalist, there's Heritage, and then there's DeSantis. DeSantis is piloting all of these huge, horrible, bad ideas. And by the way, showing us what the educational outcomes are. I'll send to Steve a really good article from the Tampa Bay Times about Florida's education outcomes are tanking. Every score, every metric by which you could measure the effectiveness of your education has been going downhill in Florida continually for the past several years. And so it's really important that we segregate, like, what are things that Ohioans are asking for from everything else, because the everything else is where the problems are coming from.
So we have another question. How are these bills not a violation of free speech? Would the ACLU launch a lawsuit?
I don't know how they're not a violation of free speech. I come down on the side that they are. And I'm sure that Sereno has a very good argument as to why I'm in the wrong there. And I don't know if the ACLU would come into the lawsuit, but I will say that behind the scenes, our coalition is starting to talk about that. And that's about all that I can share, but it's being talked about.
No more questions, Steve.
One of the things I could say from the start is I was a history teacher, and my guess is most history teachers are fairly progressive. And if these bills actually pass, there's going to be a lot of nonviolent passive resistance inside the classroom. Overall, I have been getting Honesty for Ohio Education's emails for months now, maybe years. I don't know how long. But I've never been more inspired about this topic until hearing Elaine's presentation just now. So let's give Elaine a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you, Steve, for
excellent.
also having been an educator. We need every educator in the state, current and former, to stand up and help us fight. So I'm very glad to be here with you all tonight.
Yes, and please come back. And if you need a few minute slot like Cold had at the beginning for an update, let me know and we will book you in our membership meeting.
You're on. Thank you.
And we have some more hands up, I think.
No, those were claps.
Oh, those are claps. Okay, the hands went up and then they went down. So any other question? Eric's hands is up. Eric?
You have to unmute. Okay.
Is there any plan to, if these laws take effect, to kind of like take them to court on them? It just seems like this is just so ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. And plenty of folks in our coalition agree. It's tough to kind of look down that path because, we look at like DeRolf, the DeRolf case in the 90s that determined that we have unconstitutional funding for our public schools. That case took 3 years to put together, 7 years to try, and 20 years to implement. And so when we talk about these court cases, it is a long haul and it takes money. And so, as we all know, the problem with everything in education is that there's no money. And so, I don't quite know where the leadership is going to come from, but the sentiment and the energy is there. And we're talking about what our legal options might be, and we're talking to the folks who ran the DeRolf case. And so I don't have any specific answers for you, but the will to fight is definitely existent.
That's it, Steve.
All right. Thank you all for coming, and let's give all of our presenters a round of applause. Zach, Elaine, Cole. Ohio issues are very important. Next month in May, we are going to follow up on some other issues. If you're the Progressive Caucus and you're covering everything progressive, there's a lot to cover. But we've got a very good initiative that our brothers and sisters from the Communication Workers of America are initiating. The president of Local 4302, Joe Snyder, is going to be with us to talk about a program in which they are going to attempt to get low-income people internet access to. And I think Joe knows what he's talking about because they are like the Communication Workers of America. And also, to segue off Elaine's presentation, we're going to have Cleveland State University professor Matthew Ahn talk about critical race theory and messaging that you can use in the very critical upcoming school board elections, mostly in suburban communities this year. And all of our meetings between now and November are going to always have at the beginning an update on the abortion access constitutional amendment. I mean, that's kind of a standard. So thank you all for coming. And I'm going to see, just going to check my, hey, we only missed a few minutes of the Cavs playoff game. So I think we're good. So those of you who are interested, turn your computers off and turn the Cavs on, which is what I'm going to do. Thank you. Good night.